DJ Nation fam. Is it 2 times in 1 week? Yeah, you're right. I think it is. It's the Week 13 main slate with the DJ Nation podcast powered by the Fantasy Authority. We are back at it once again to break down this Week 13 main slate goodness with you guys here at the DJ Nation podcast. And we appreciate you guys rocking along with us as we usually do, or as we've been doing this year on a Friday. I'm Ryan Williams. You can find me on Twitter and X at RyanAlexander_W, joined by the usual suspects, Maddie 2v2, Maddie Gets Buckets, Maddie DFS is where you can find him on Twitter and X, and the Godfather, the one and only Mr. Kevin Steele. You know him on Twitter and X at Fantasy Rad 13. Fellas, we're recovering from the Thanksgiving slate where all of the chalk pretty much hit at every one of the positions. So if you played the chalk, you probably felt really good about your Thanksgiving slate. If you avoided the chalk, then you're probably looking to bounce back here on the Week 13 main slate. How we doing, fellas? How you feeling about the way that Sunday's shaping up for you guys?
Yeah, Sunday looks like a decent slate. Thanksgiving slate was a fun one. We talked about the first game and the last game would be the best two games of the slate, and that ended up being, what came to fruition.
Yeah.
The Cowboys and Giants did score a little bit, but it was, the guys that we were on, like Rico Dowdle smashed and we were all over him. So, we had the right pieces from most of the games. I myself wasn't on Tua, considering he typically doesn't have a ceiling. But that offense is so concentrated that, everybody got there, including Tua this week. So, they just didn't run the ball at all. They threw the ball pretty much every play. So,
Yeah.
Tua was bound to get there with that happening. But yeah, no, the slate this weekend looks fun. Of course, the most exciting game of the week, Eagles Ravens. Everybody's priced through the roof. I mean, Lamar's 8K, Hurts is pretty much 8K, Barkley's over 8K, Derrick Henry's almost 8K. So it's going to be tough to get exposure to that game, even though it's the best game of the week. So we'll talk about it and chop it up here in a second, but it should be a fun slate.
Yeah, definitely looking like a fun slate. Clev, how you feeling? How you doing today, man?
Oh, good. I mean, we're a forward-thinking show, so we're moving forward. We're not talking about what happened today or yesterday. Licking the wounds a little bit, but it's okay because I really do like the slate. Ever since I opened it up, I really liked it. And we were talking about it before, but there's 6 games on the slate with 45 or more or higher totals. And I think the one that kind of stood out to me that I was kind of surprised with was the Rams and the Saints game, which has a 49.5 point total, just under the Baltimore game. So that was one of the I was not expecting that game to be as high. But, I mean, that's one I don't know if people are going to get to as much. But then you have the Atlanta and Chargers game. That was the other game I liked a lot, 47.5 point total. So the one thing with the Baltimore Philly game I think is interesting is that these are two teams with very elite level run defenses that you just can't run against these defenses. So it will be kind of interesting to see how that kind of plays out and how you want to build these teams, because typically we see, especially from the Eagles side, where they don't really throw the ball as much. They haven't had to. They haven't been pushed to have to throw the ball that much. We haven't really seen a Hurts game where he's really been forced to throw the ball at a really high rate. So that'll be interesting to kind of see how all this plays out. But like Betty said, I mean, that game is really priced through the roof. So you kind of got to get interesting. And it would have been maybe a little bit easier if Devonta Smith looked like he was going to be out, because then, maybe you open things up a little bit with Dallas Goedert. But not, if Smith looks like he's going to play, that kind of takes that away. So I think it's kind of an interesting slate to kind of get into and kind of figure out where everybody's at with it.
Yeah, it's a really fun slate. We got another 10 gamer ahead of us. Of course, we talk about this from a DraftKings perspective. FanDuel, you do have 11 games over there, but for DraftKings purposes, we're not talking about that Sunday late game with the Bills and the 49ers. We're breaking down the 10 game slate, and we've kind of been in this happy medium of games of 10, right around the range of 10 to be able to build around, which is very enticing. And usually we don't have as many quarterbacks to talk about in really good spots, really good game environments. But this week is definitely shaping up as such. And we have a situation, we'll talk about it when we go further into some of the skill position spots, but it looks like, maybe the Black Friday, all the holiday pricing has gotten to DraftKings because we do have some value across the board outside of guys in injury spots. But we do have some valued spots across the board, mainly at the skill position players. But, when we start off at quarterback, I mean, we have to talk about Justin Herbert, who's really, I guess, I don't know if it's going to be the first game necessarily to kick off, so to speak, but in the noon slate for those of you guys who are in Central Time, Herbert comes in at $5,600, and he had a game just recently against the Baltimore team where we usually have targeted quarterbacks to be able to pass ad nauseum against that team, and he did see 36 attempts, which is his, I believe, his second, or it was his second highest output on the season. He had seen I believe 39 attempts against Arizona, but it's a pretty concentrated offense when we talk about the passing game. There's not going to be J.K. Dobbins there, and we'll talk about that at the running back position. But going against this Atlanta team, in Atlanta, where there's been some enticing games that have happened in Atlanta already this year. The Seahawks game went for 48 points there. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers had a 66-pointer game there, went into overtime. Saints game was very nice. Cowboys game got to 48. Like, there's been some nice high totals there. So no surprise if we see Justin Herbert be super popular at the quarterback position, granted his price and the way that it shapes out. We also have Joe Burrow back on a main slate. It feels like a little bit since we've had Burrow on a main slate before, who is really enticing. He comes in at $7K. Not sure how highly owned he'll be. It's a home matchup. It's expected to be, pretty frigid temperatures there in Cincinnati, going against a Pittsburgh team, which people don't usually like to target their defense, but they have been kind of like almost a bend don't break defense. They have been exploitable. There's some matchups there that could be had. And we know that Burrow's just throwing the ball. I mean, this team has pretty much abandoned the run and decided that they're just going to let Burrow throw for 40 plus times in every game. They're definitely fighting for a playoff spot. This is a divisional matchup against a team who's, higher ranked than them in the division. So big win for them coming in. And I think they'll have to lean on Burrow. Was mentioned, I think, by you, Kev. But yeah, the Baltimore-Philly game, Maddie, you brought it up too with the pricing, but we've seen this before. If the game is the game, you just got to fit the guys in there. And Philly, Baltimore just has the makings of what could be a late hammer with two very exciting quarterbacks going against each other, and Lamar and Jalen. It's just interesting how you can stack them. Now, Cody comes in. Appreciate Cody rocking with us at the DGen Nation podcast. Member of the Fantasy Authority. Stafford going to go overlooked because he's 200 more than Herbert. He probably will go overlooked, but that's another concentrated offense with Cooper Kupp and Nakua really just raking in with Stafford there. I think the issue that you kind of find with Stafford is the red zone numbers. And I haven't been too far into the weeds, but I just know they've been on so many showdown slates and it have been frustrating at times that they can't get the ball into the end zone. I know that Kyron has kind of struggled to find the end zone as of late with the wide receivers being back healthy. But yeah, we can expect the Rams to put up some points. Stafford's always going to be interesting. And then I think, the other interesting game to me that jumps off the page is this Indy-New England game. You talked about Drake May last week, and I'm not as interested in Drake May this week as I am in Anthony Richardson on the other side. And the reason being is because we probably aren't getting Josh Downs in this game. And so the pass catchers are becoming condensed, and he struggled a little bit last week, so maybe people will be off of him. But this is kind of a favorable matchup for him. If he can get going, this environment could really pop off. And Jonathan Taylor has not, really been able to do much. It's going to be at the hands of Anthony Richardson, I feel like, on the road going to New England. And we would like to see him be able to elevate some of the lineups and see how that goes. I'll pass it to you, Maddie. There is another quarterback that I wanted to bring up, but I don't want to take up all the time here at the quarterback positions and keep this less than a 2-hour pod than the Thanksgiving one was. So I'm going to bring Maddie in, and why don't you talk to the people about how you're kind of viewing the slate through your lenses as you get ready to build your lineups for Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of touched on already the guys that I'm interested in. I don't know, Herbert is definitely the best, point per dollar play in a vacuum on this slate. I mean, Atlanta's pass defense has just been abysmal this year. Their defense in totality has just been bad. And without J.K. Dobbins, they'll have Gus Edwards and Kamani Vidal back there as their running backs. And, quite frankly, those two guys haven't been great, when you look at their, their rushing metrics. So, this could end up falling on Herbert's, shoulders to throw the ball more. But he is going to be the most popular quarterback on the slate, but it's for good reason. So, single entry stuff, totally cool with playing Herbert. The large field stuff, I'd probably fade and go elsewhere. But he's in such a good matchup. So just wanted to touch on, that he's going to be he's the obvious play of the week, but he's going to be very popular as well. So I do like the Anthony Richardson call as well. I mean, the New England pass defense has been non-existent this season. We saw the Rams go into New England, a couple weeks ago, and Stafford threw for, what was it, 304, pretty much. I think it was 295. But, New England's pass defense has just given it up to everybody. And that's really where Richardson has struggled when he struggles. He's against every defense, he's been running the ball. Like last week, he had 10 carries for 60 yards. And that's been 10 carries is been pretty much par for the course for him. I mean, week 11, he had 10 for 32 and 2 touchdowns. Week 7, he had 14 carries for 56 yards against Miami. So that offense really does roll through Anthony Richardson. So, if the Colts are going to put up any points at all, he's 5,500. He's a rushing quarterback who can score 2 touchdowns on the ground. And that pass defense is non-existent. So, you get him to 225 or 250 through the air also. And maybe 1 or 2 passing touchdowns, and you're cooking with gas. If Downs is out, I mean, that really concentrates that offense, which is what we're looking for in stacking partners with our quarterbacks. So I think A-Rich is interesting. I do like the Stafford call at New Orleans. That game's got, all the makings of a shootout as well. That's 2 defenses there that haven't really been playing great this year. So I do like the Stafford call. Again, another offense that's consolidated from a target tree standpoint. And then one guy, I probably won't play him. But I think we very briefly brought him up. I don't remember if it was the Thanksgiving pod or if it was main slate pod last week. I think it was Thanksgiving pod because we were talking about, the game against the Chiefs last week. But Bryce Young has looked better ever since he came back from being benched. Yeah. And he's 4,700 and probably the best matchup of the entire slate against Tampa Bay. He's at home. He's got one of his receivers is going to be extremely chalky, and that's David Moore. I'm seeing 30% ownership for David Moore, which is kind of crazy. That David Moore gets that much ownership on a main slate in the year 2024.
No Coker and no. I think there's one other guy who's going to.
Well, they traded Mingo too.
And they traded Mingo, right?
Yeah, so it's Thielen, Leggett, and David Moore. That's their offense, and their tight end, Jatavion Sanders. He got hurt last week, so he's. I haven't seen an update on him, but I'd imagine he's probably not playing.
I think he's been ruled out already, Matty.
Yeah, so there you go. So David Moore had 10 targets last week, so that's another spot, where it's a very, very, very cheap stack. Bryce Young's 4,700, David Moore's 3,500. And then the other side, Bucky Irving's 5,800. You can play some Mike Evans. Like that game could be very interesting. And I don't think there's not going to be a soul that game stacks that. So that's a fun one to think about. Bryce Young, I'm seeing 3%, but a guy that's 4,700 that could realistically get you 20. I know he hasn't hit that yet. 16's been his ceiling this year, but he did have a 25 burger last year against Green Bay. So it's definitely in the range of outcomes. We know he's got a little bit of mobility, not nearly as much as Richardson, but 50 rush yards over the last 2 games for Bryce Young. So definitely is some rushing upside, but that one's a little off the board, but there's a lot of, like we talked about, some of these games have some high price guys, and there's not necessarily, ways to fit them in with a ton of value. So Bryce Young's definitely an option.
Yeah, I like it, Matty. That's definitely a fun one and an off the board play. As I was looking to do maybe some mini stacks with Tampa Bay, Carolina. So that's an interesting play. Kev usually is the one who talks about the interesting plays and the cheap quarterbacks. But Kev, where are you looking at to start your builds with the quarterback position for the Week 13 main slate?
The only thing that I will say that does concern me a little bit is within that game is because I know if you just look at a lot of the numbers, the Buccaneers' pass defense has been really bad, but they've been without some of their key players on defense, and especially at corner, and they got those guys back this week. Jamel Dean is back, as well as Zion McCollum is back as well. So that I think will help their defense a little bit as well. So that is something to keep in consideration. But in terms of, obviously we can talk about, the obvious guys, but one I have to bring up is CJ Stroud. I think he makes a lot of sense. I know people aren't going to want to play him because he hasn't really looked right this year. This offense hasn't looked right. But if there's been a get right spot, go play the Jags because the Jags pass defense has been just brutal. And it really sets up nicely, I think, for what they do best, especially for their playmakers for the Texans. And so you have the Jaguars over the last 5 games have allowed almost 300 yards passing a game, nearly 2 passing touchdowns per game, which that'd actually be higher, except you had the Sam Darnold game where Sam Darnold looked like Sam Darnold again all of a sudden. But they really have struggled with the deep ball this year. They've allowed a 9.1 yards per attempt, the second highest rate in the league. But they have also allowed the most passes of 20-plus yards and the most passes of 40-plus yards this year. It's really not that close on either one of those. So I think, Stroud and Nico Collins make a lot of sense. We've kind of seen that connection where Nico has had 2 touchdowns, deep touchdowns called back due to penalty since he's come back. So, but I think Stroud is definitely an option you can look at against Jacksonville. And honestly, I don't mind the other side of the game. I think when people talk about Trevor Lawrence this year, there's been a lot of, you hear a lot of people talk about him poorly. Like, Trevor Lawrence has been really bad. But at least for DK purposes, if you're wanting a cheap quarterback, Trevor Lawrence is $5,400. And before he got hurt, he was really starting to roll. 22 DK points, 28 DK points, 15, 18, 25. He was starting to play a lot better before he got hurt and missed some time. And the injury is not on his throwing shoulder, so that's a positive. So we're not really necessarily worried about that part of it. But and then I think if you wanted to do something like that with Trevor Lawrence in this game environment with these 2 teams, that it's kind of going to be pretty consolidated because Gabe Davis is out, Christian Kirk is out, so it's really easy with Brian Thomas and Evan Ingram to kind of stack that side of the game if you really want to. So I don't mind Trevor Lawrence whatsoever. I like that game environment, and so. Whether either side of the ball, I think you could definitely go there. Now, whether you just want to play minis or something like that from that game, I could understand if you don't want a full game stack that game. But I do like that game. And then it's hard not to love the Bengals and the Pittsburgh game, right? Because the way the Bengals have been playing, the Bengals offense has been absolutely scorched earth, right? They have just been absolutely crushing lately. And Joe Burrow's last 5 games, the dude's thrown 12 touchdown passes and averaging 350 passing yards a game over his last 5. That is insane numbers, right? And I don't think the Steelers' defense is as good as what people think that it is. I think it's good. It's not great. You can definitely throw the ball against them. We saw in kind of the snow globe game that Jerry Jeudy was starting to get loose on them, and so. But the game environment sets up really nice. We know the Bengals' defense isn't very good, and George Pickens is an easy play, I think, at his cost. We'll get to wide receiver, but you could stack Burrow. And I think, whether you want to, and honestly, with Higgins or Jamar Chase, if you want to throw Chase Brown in that an entire game stack. Now, the only concern you have is that it's a division game. These games kind of get a little weird. We kind of felt the same way when it came to the Ravens-Steelers game. That game didn't really take off. So that's possible for something like that to happen. But the total is definitely there at 47.5. The Bengals are actually favored in this game with a 25.5 point total for them. That's one of the higher totals on the slate. So I do like getting to Burrow. We kind of talked about some of their pieces aren't as expensive, so I do like getting there at 7K. This is again another kind of must-win game for the Bengals. They have to continue to win out basically if they want to make the playoffs at this point. So. I do like that environment. I really like a lot of the pass catchers there within that game as well. And then Baker Mayfield's probably, we can't really I can't just not talk about Baker Mayfield because he's been arguably the best quarterback, for fantasy purposes this year. He's one of the most reliable DK, players this year. 6,600, very easy stack. Just stack him with, in my opinion, just stack him with Mike Evans and move on. I don't think you have to do anything cute. Kate Otten kind of fell out of favor a little bit. If you wanted to go there, you could, but I don't really love it.
After he put up 30 when you weren't playing him, Kev.
Yeah.
He just made sure he showed up that week, and then he checked out. Said I'm good.
Well, last week we saw. It's all like a 12% target share or something like that in that game. Now it is fair. It should be mentioned for sure that obviously that game environment last week. They pretty much steamrolled the Giants the last time they played, so they didn't really need to do a whole lot to be able to continue to throw the ball. So that helped. But regardless of that, I still think just easy stack with him and Mike Evans and move on. I get the other side of the call, that the way Bryce Young was looked and stuff like that, but I don't know. I don't necessarily I think if I was going to play somebody, it might be Chuba Hubbard. If I was going to play somebody on the other side of that game, as some sort of a run back, just because how involved he is also as a pass catcher as well. If I was going to, but Baker Mayfield, really easy play at 6,600.
Yeah, I do like the Baker play. We'll talk about wide receiver, but Mike Evans has been, he's had some incredible games against this Carolina team, playing them, twice a year, and comes back from the hamstring injury and seems fine. So I do kind of agree with you, Kev. I think a mini stack with him and Evans makes a ton of sense. You could even maybe take a running back with him as well too. We'll talk about that at the position, but I think the stacks are pretty straightforward. I love that you called out both CJ Stroud and Trevor Lawrence in that game. Both of those defenses have been giving up points ad nauseum to the quarterback position. If it wasn't for Baltimore, these two teams would be, pretty much at the top there. And what a get right spot for CJ Stroud too. And we've kind of talked about him the past couple of weeks. We talked about him last week with Nico, talked about playing him on Showdown, and he didn't really get there. But earlier this year, he had his best game on the season against this Jacksonville team, putting up 345 and 2. So, with Nico, being back in the mix there, I think this makes for an incredible mini stack that we would be loving to target. I think Jacksonville D just we really haven't had to think about them because of maybe Mac Jones being on the other side and not being willing to push the pace. But because the offense is so concentrated on the Jacksonville side in a favorable matchup, you brought it up, Kev. I mean, Evan Ingram pops off the page. Brian Thomas Jr. at his price is absolutely absurd, 5,500. So this makes for a great game stack to me, and one that I definitely want to be targeting and getting ahead of. I think there is a case to be made for Trevor Lawrence if he is indeed going to be the starter there. I think that's what the reports were saying, that they were preparing for him to play. So I do love that game. From a stacking standpoint, I wanted to make sure we talked about that. Yeah, quarterback. I mean, again, we talked about it at the top, like the quarterback options are just at a plethora, and so as we talk about all week here on the DJ Nation podcast, you want to really target the game environment that you think is going to explode, and don't be afraid to overstack it, because if that's the game that you had to have, even with all these other good spots that we're kind of talking about, we see it every week, like the one game could really take off and explode. I do want to talk about this Philly and Baltimore game for a quick second before we, touch on any others that we'd be interested in and move on to running back. But like, this kind of feels like the Baltimore and Cincinnati game that we had earlier this year to me, with these two offenses kind of facing each other and the paths to success. I mean, with Lamar being there, and if Henry can't get going against Philly, we know he can spread the ball around. It's just a matter of like, who do you stack him with, right? But on the Philly side, like, we know exactly who to stack Philly with, especially if Devonta Smith is not able to go again in this game. It's going to be AJ Brown and Dallas Goedert show all day long with some Saquon, of course, mixed in. But I really do like the Philly side of this, because we have been attacking Baltimore through the air. We have yet to see kind of Jalen Hurts be, unleashed. And I would love to see that. His pass attempts have kind of been around the 20-25 range all season. And if, if Lamar is able to do his thing on the other side and make some things happen, we could see Jalen Hurts pop off. Are you guys feeling like you'd get to this game at all, or just price considered, it just makes it too tough to have these pieces?
Yeah, I think you have to have interest in this game, because that game is, that game either puts you in first place in a tournament or you don't cash, right? Like, because the guys are priced so high that if you play them and they get you like 20 points, you're toast, because the Herberts of the world and all those other guys that are much, much cheaper that allow you to pay up for, all the good running backs and such. Those guys will get you, in that upper teens, 20 point range regardless. But Lamar and Hurts are probably the only two on the slate that legit have 35 plus upside. I mean, sure, these other quarterbacks we talked about are in decent spots. Like, Herbert, I don't know that he's ever scored 30, right? Burrow at home against Pittsburgh. I mean, sure, it's definitely possible.
He's coming off 3 straight 30-point TK games. So.
Yeah, I mean, Burrow's definitely possible. I'd say he's up there, but he's not cheap either. No. And then Stafford, he rarely scores 30. Russell Wilson, I can't tell you last time he scored 30. So like, I just say that because, if you're paying for these guys, you really do need the 35, plus point game.
Right.
Getting 27 out of them is not going to be good enough because of how much they cost. So, but all that to say, there is a path for that to happen for either Lamar or Hurts. And so I don't think they should be excluded from a player pool. Absolutely not.
Do you have a preferred route that you would go, Maddie, if you were playing one team, if you had to build around Philly side or Baltimore side?
I would probably go Lamar personally.
That's fair.
I just think that offense flows through Lamar more than the other one flows through Hurts because of how freaking good Saquon's been over the last few weeks.
Yeah.
If there's any inkling of success on the ground for Philly, they're just going to continue to run the ball. And I know that, Ravens can say the same thing with having Derrick Henry on the other side, but I just think that, there's way more design runs that are like effective for Lamar than there are for Hurts. And I just think Lamar has a better chance of getting, a 100-yard rush game, or, I'd say Hurts probably more likely to score multiple rushing touchdowns, but Lamar is probably more likely to have more rushing yards and could get you that 100-yard bonus possibly if that game went absolutely insane. So I would lean Lamar, but if you're not playing Barkley, you absolutely can play Hurts, and that's how you get leverage on that with Hurts taking the touchdowns.
Yeah, interesting. Kev, what say you, man?
Yeah, first off, I feel like Tony Reali here on part of my take, but Justin Herbert has scored 30-plus points in 8 games in his career, so that has definitely happened. He's actually scored over 35 6 times. So
that was with Keenan Allen and all those guys when all those guys were in their prime, not a bunch.
He scored 30 twice. He scored 30 twice last year. So
and 0 this year.
Oh, just I'm just throwing it out there. You said ever. You said ever. Okay.
And
the most he's ever scored was 42.
I'm not going back 8 years.
This was all 20. What are you talking about? This was
he's scored 30 plus once in the last 2 seasons. Maybe twice. Okay, twice. I'm just saying 2 times out of what? 20? What is that? 28 games ish.
I'm just throwing it out there. I'm just saying.
I'm just saying he's
you're moving
the
chalkiest. You just said. I'm saying you said ever. I just wanted to check to see if he'd ever done it. Well, I thought that seemed right.
I'm just saying that he's going to be the chalkiest QB on the slate, and there's other guys that have bigger upside than him.
Price considered, though.
Agree. Kev, who are you playing?
We already talked about this.
No, who are you playing? If you had to play the Philly Baltimore side, who are you going with?
I mean, I think the obvious one would be,
or just say you don't want to play.
I think the obvious side would be on the Jalen Hurts side because of how bad because how bad Baltimore's pass defense has been this year.
Yeah.
Where you can't say that about Philadelphia. Philadelphia's secondary has been phenomenal, just absolutely shutting everybody down, and so that is the concern there for them. But this game could also get ugly. I know it has one of the highest totals on the slate. And a lot of times, like these types of games, when this happens, these games tend to fail. And just because these two defenses are so good. And I could see a scenario where it's a 24-20 type game and not the type of scenario where we think that it goes out and it puts up all the points, not necessarily a game that you need to have. And with everybody being so expensive, it has to be that kind of a game for it to kill you. I don't hate like certain one-off pieces of this game, like A.J. Brown sets up really nicely. I'm not that excited to play Derrick Henry. I'm not really that excited to play Saquon on this. Now, Saquon could get there. He's just been on another planet this year. I'm not saying I would full X X him out, but I'm not as excited about him this week than I am of some of the other options that you have sitting out there, just because of how good the Ravens have been against running backs this year. And the same thing for Philly. Philadelphia has been excellent against running backs this year, and so it makes it a little bit tougher to get there. I will say I think Lamar is probably easier to stack because his pass catchers are cheaper than what Philadelphia's are. And he can always get there on the ground as well. So and maybe you look at it as like maybe you run these guys naked. You don't necessarily have to pair them with somebody because Jalen Hurts can go out there, and rushed for 3 touchdowns. So I think that's also a possibility as well. But it's just a tougher spot because everybody's so damn expensive.
No, I agree. I do agree with you though, Kev. I think for me, it's the hurt side as well too. With no Devonta, like I think we could just see all the volume go through Brown and Goddard, and Goddard's 4,300, so that makes a very cheap stack with him. And I kind of don't want to play AJ solo. I think there's some other wide receiver spots that I'd rather play with him. If AJ Brown's going out and get 30, I want to have Hurts along for the ride with him at that point. Because of what I can expect the concentration to be. But yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I agree, Kev. Like it's either, for me, it's all or nothing. Like if I'm playing that game, I want to stack that game. If I'm not playing it, I don't want to have but maybe one cheap piece from it that just fits into other builds. Don't want to take these other guys at their price tag. Fun quarterback slate, guys. Fun quarterback slate to discuss and dive in. And one of the better ones that we've had all year. It feels like to talk about, at least at this point, going into the Sunday slate. A shout out to everybody who's rocking along with us. This is the DJ Nation Pod. We're live breaking down the Week 13 main slate, but you might be hearing it back on your audio airwaves where you get your podcast, and we appreciate that too. Make sure you guys are hitting the link in description. If you're watching on YouTube, give us a like, thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. We appreciate that as always. Boys, let's talk about the running back position, and we got some things to talk about the running back position. We got Saquon Barkley at the top, of course. Like I've said, I mean, this guy can break the slate anytime that he's on it. Has a really tough matchup here against Baltimore, who I believe is allowing the third fewest rushing yards against this year, only 6 rushing touchdowns. So, a tough sledding for him, but maybe he'll get there. He's just 8,500. You're going to have to pay for him. Mixon as well as 8K, and without a robust passing role, with Nico Collins being back, especially involved, it's tough to kind of play that price tag for him, but he's going against Jacksonville. And, if you're playing CJ Stroud lineups, I guess that's your leverage there, is thinking that all the running production could come on the ground, and we know Mixon is capable of doing that. He's just most likely going to need to find the end zone probably multiple times for him to pay off this 8K because of the situation of the slate. Expect Alvin Kamara. He's back on the slate. He's going to be popular. He's actually seen a price decrease from where we were used to seeing him at. He comes in at 7,700 going against this Rams team. He's going to be interesting. Chuba Hubbard, to me, at 6,700 is really interesting. He's had this role for a while here, and going against the Tampa Bay team, it is a pretty favorable matchup. He's had a pretty robust, I shouldn't say robust, but 11 targets in the past 2 games with Bryce Young. So he is getting some pass catching work there. Tampa Bay's I feel like we've talked about this with their defense for a while, like pass catching backs against them have had success. I feel like he could potentially be priced out in the $6,700 range where he's coming in at. Chase Brown, I don't even want to. Kev's been on him all year, and so is Maddie, especially in Showdown. I don't want to steal you guys' thunder, but 6,200 is just too cheap for him. He's probably going to be a starting point for a lot of people in their lineups, even against Pittsburgh. I just don't see how you don't play this guy at 6,200 with the role he's been having. Bucky Irving is also interesting. Now, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have been really frustrating all year. Said it would be a three-headed monster. We've seen Sean Tucker be involved, as well as Rashad White. Then Sean Tucker kind of gets out of favor. All of a sudden, Bucky Irving comes in, and he's really had a really good hold on the role. But since White's been back in the mix, they're using White in the pass catching game. It's been really insane. You actually, you could start playing both of these guys together, and I know some sharp people have been on that route because their price tags don't increase, but they both are getting the role. They both are getting usage. Even with Sean Tucker scoring a touchdown last week, Bucky was able to find the end zone. I believe he got stopped, short of having a second one as well. Rashad White's finding the end zone. They're just so involved, but without Sean Tucker now, so you're really only worried about 2 guys. This has been a matchup against the Carolina Panthers we've targeted all year. I expect to have a Tampa Bay Buccaneer running back on a good majority of my lineups. Then, of course, if we're talking about cheap guys, I do think it's interesting. I'm not sure. So Austin Eckler's already been ruled out. I'm not sure about Brian Robinson. It looks like he might be playing.
He's full
maybe
he was a full participant.
He's back.
He's
okay.
He's off the injury report.
Okay, so he doesn't have a pass catching role It doesn't seem like they've been using Austin Eckler in that spot, but now that he's out, we've seen Jeremy McNichols been worked in. He would have been real interesting if Brian Robinson wasn't back, but maybe that might be an avoid there. I just wanted to bring that up because I knew that was an injury situation. Another injury situation that we have is with the Chargers. So there's not going to be any J.K. Dobbins. They will be having Gus Edwards as their lead back, so to speak, is what they say. He's 4,300. We've seen this story before in Baltimore. Ironically, when J.K. Dobbins was their young back and Gus Edwards was there as kind of the change of pace, and J.K. Dobbins being out, they thrust Gus Edwards into a full-time role. He's really a yardage and plouder kind of back. He's not going to be out there catching passes. Herbert's going to be popular. Maybe there is some leverage there to say that the touchdowns come on the ground. He's only 4,300, so I know that he will definitely garner some interest because of that price tag. But it looks like Kaimi Vidal, I believe, is the rookie's name, and then also Hassan Haskins can be there to spell Gus Edwards as well. So it's not like he's gonna necessarily have the role all to himself, so to speak, but it is one to monitor because they are going against Atlanta there on the road, and only a 4,300 back. That's something that we like for DFS purposes. Maddie, what say you at the running back position, and where are you going to be trying to build around here for your builds? Is it going to be are you looking to get in the high price range, or are you going to be staying in this mid range, or possibly even paying down at some cheap guys who might look like value on paper?
Yeah, I think the obvious one is Chase Brown at 6,200 against the Steelers. I mean, the Steelers have actually given up a ton of rushing touchdowns this year. I think they gave up 3 to the Commanders 3 weeks ago. They gave up 2 to Nick Chubb last week. We were on him on Showdown and gave up 1 to Derrick Henry 2 weeks ago. So that's 6 in the last 3 games that they've allowed. And the Steelers are on the road here. So I like that. I like the spot for Chase Brown. He's involved in the pass game as well. Doesn't really come off the field much. 6,200 is just too cheap for his role, and it's really not that bad of a matchup. So he's going to be popular, but I don't think it really matters. Bijan Robinson's another one that's been crushing recently. Ignoring last week, that he played the week before their bye. It was 5 straight games of over 23 DK points, or over 21 DK points. And he does have a 32 burger mixed in there against New Orleans. So 7,300 for a guy who's pretty much a lock to get in that 20 to 25 DK point range. And he's part of that game environment, that we like a lot with the Chargers at Atlanta. So I do like Bijan. 2 guys at the top, Kamara and Kyron Williams. I'm totally cool with playing both of those guys. Kamara's heavily utilized in the pass game. He's going to have to continue to be, considering they don't really have any wide receivers, with MVS being their wide receiver 1 currently. And then Kyron Williams, he's kind of fallen out of the touchdown department. He did score 1 last week, but prior to that, he had gone 3 weeks without a touchdown, but was still putting up 10 plus DK points without touchdowns. So he's always pretty touchdown dependent. But that's the defense. Bijan just nuked for 30 plus against the Saints. So I do think Kyron's in a good spot there on the road against New Orleans. He should be able to have success, and he's always a candidate to score 3 touchdowns. We know the Rams love to run it when they get in tight. So I do think he's going to go overlooked a bit. And 7,200 is probably the cheapest. Well, it is the cheapest we've seen him. He got up over 8K for a few weeks there earlier in the season. So definitely a discount on Kyron. I like Kyron a lot. And then, you briefly mentioned Bucky Irving, that Tampa Bay at Carolina game. Tampa Bay is obviously going to put up a ton of points, and Bucky Irving's definitely the best running back that they have. So I expect Bucky to continue to lead the team in opportunities. He tied White with carries last week, but Bucky saw all the targets and White didn't hardly see any. So I think Bucky's slowly starting to take over that lead dog role, and especially if they get out to a big lead, right? I would expect Bucky, being the rookie, to handle the majority of the touches there in that game. And then Gus Edwards, you mentioned the Chargers running back situation. It's just, he just doesn't catch passes, which is, what I really like to include in my running backs. But I mean, at the same time, he's 4,300 for a guy that has a possibility of scoring multiple touchdowns, given, Atlanta's defense has really struggled this year in all departments. So he's an interesting leverage play off of Chalky Herbert. Because Gus Edwards is coming in at 10%, whereas Herbert's going to lead the slate in ownership at the quarterback position. So I think Gus Edwards is definitely interesting, and he's in consideration, but he's not a slam dunk lock play, even with Dobbins out.
So you wouldn't call him a free square?
He is not a free square. Not like Mike Davis back when the Bears played the Panthers.
He was $300 cheaper as well too. So
yeah.
Come on in, Kev. What you talking about? What you thinking?
I was just asking a question. I just wanted to know.
No, I'm saying
because we're gonna hear that's going to be said a lot around the industry this week about something like him. Is that
he is not a free square.
Just asking. So, anyways, all right. So, I don't have a lot of different names. I will say this, and I will add a little bit of context to one of them was Chase Brown. Chase, like with the when it comes to the Steelers, the people look at the Steelers situation. Basically, since week 7, they have really started to fall off a cliff in terms of what they allow to the run, because they've allowed about 4.5 yards per carry, which is the 11th highest rate in the league, the 3rd most rushing touchdowns, the 11th highest explosive run rate, the 8th lowest stuff rate, and their 2.36 yards before contact is the 3rd highest rate in the league since that time. So it really is a really phenomenal matchup for Chase Brown, and it's just hard to find a running back that's going to see 86% of the rush attempts, 61% of the routes, a 17% target share since he's taken over this backfield from Zach Moss. So it's just $6,200, and price be damned. Like, it feels like one of those really good chalk plays. Like, you just eat the chalk and just keep it moving on him, because he just should not be that cheap to me. And so, like, I don't know what DraftKings was doing with this. Like, he should have been in the 7K range. He shouldn't be the RB15 in terms of overall pricing. So I definitely agree with that one. I will say too, Bucky Irving has been phenomenal. So obviously the great matchup with him. But I just wanted to it's not even just that. Like, he has been one of the most efficient running backs in the league as well. His 7.4% explosive run rate ranks 3rd among all running backs this year. 3rd in missed tackles forced per attempt. Trails only James Conner and Kenneth Walker. And he's also 3rd in yards after contact per attempt, 11th in yards per outrun. Like, Bucky Irving has been phenomenal, and he's $5,800. Like, but I also say, I mean, over the last 5 or 6 weeks, Rachaad White has not been nearly as efficient at all, but he continually gets there as well. So both of these guys have been pretty steady options. I played a lot of Bucky Irving last week. He was, he went out and had a really solid game, but I prefer Bucky Irving to Rachaad White, but I think Rachaad White's definitely in consideration as well, as an option. Another one that you guys didn't bring up that I'm okay with, and it feels a little it's Kenneth Walker, because Kenneth Walker hasn't really over the last 3 or 4 weeks hasn't really got there, but the usage is definitely still there. 72% of the snaps, 68% of the rush attempts, and an 11% target share since week 9, averaging about 18 touches per game. But the one thing I'll say is that some of the matchups that I think we look at in the games they've played haven't been great, right? Like, I think like last week, Arizona was a good example of that, where everybody, I think, looks at Arizona and says, oh, well, Arizona, it's Arizona, their defense is terrible. This really hasn't been the case. Arizona's defense has actually been really good. Their run defense has actually been really, really good. And so some of it, I think that kind of makes it look like why Kenneth Walker has struggled. But I'll say this, the Jets have really struggled against the run. They've allowed the 10th most rushing yards, the most rushing touchdowns, and 12th in yards after contact per attempt over the last 6 games. So, and this is also a team that's just completely falling apart. Really wouldn't shock me at all if the Seahawks boat race the Jets, because the Jets feel like they are just cratering before our eyes. And so Kenneth Walker, I think, is also in play. We know super explosive running back, has, 25, 30-point upside if everything breaks his way, 7K. So I do like that. I like that play as well. I think Tony Pollard is kind of sneaky. I would have liked a little bit more if Tajay Spears would have been ruled out, but he's another player that is, that has been really pretty reliable at $6,300 if you want to play him. Chuba Hubbard. I just want to reiterate, if we want to talk about a player that's seeing a similar workload to a Chase Brown, Chuba Hubbard is probably in the conversation, because the last 3 weeks, this dude has played 88% of the snaps, 86% of the snaps, and 82% of the snaps. He's running a lot of routes, about 60% of the routes. 11 targets the last week, which I believe you mentioned, Ryan. And he's also scoring a ton of touchdowns. He scored a touchdown in every game since week 3 but 2. So the upside is certainly there with him. It's not a terrible matchup against the Bucks. So I don't mind him either at $6,700. Like, I don't feel like he's really getting the credit that he deserves, how good he's actually been this year. And he's also seeing just an incredible role, in that offense as well. So I do like that I do like that call as well.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about, Miles Sanders has been, on the IR, so you haven't had to worry about that. And then even with Jonathan Brooks coming back last week, they're going to slow roll this rookie guy. So I mean, there's just nobody else to kind of take away from his production. And he just is always forgotten about. He just is one of those guys that people just don't tend to click on for whatever reason. He always tends to get there. I will say, like, again, priced at 6,700, it makes a decision to play him because of his price. But still, I mean, he's super valuable, and I think we have enough, other lower price plays to be able to fit him in comfortably. I do like getting to Chuba in that game, especially with it being in the late window as well too. It's gonna be nice.
We mentioned Joe Mixon, right? I completely overlooked that. I meant to say something about it.
I just briefly brought him up, but go ahead, Kev.
Joe Mixon's the best running back play on the slate. Like, I don't know how I didn't mention that right off the top. Like, he is easily the best running back play on the slate. Like he has been phenomenal this year. I know he didn't have as great of a game in the last game he played in, but the Jaguars, obviously, all things considered, they're terrible against the run too. So, I mean, this is a smash spot as well for Joe Mixon. 8K, like, of all the running backs, I think he's probably the best play on the slate just because of the matchup, because of the usage. We know that this dude, especially if they get a lead, he's going to see 20, 25 touches in that game. They've been utilizing him a lot more in the past game than I would have expected. I know the last game, like I said, against Tennessee, that game was kind of a weird game. But other than that, like, this is a player that has had monster games this year, and he's just easily at 8K, one of the best plays on the slate. Like, I meant to talk about him, and I thought we talked about him, but then I was like, well, let me make sure. I don't want to move on to wide receivers without saying that, because it is a phenomenal spot for Joe Mixon for this week.
Yeah, really, really good spot on paper. I think the thing that you want with Joe Mixon, Kev, is that it's a good spot for CJ as well too. So, like, playing Joe Mixon, you're really needing those touchdowns, I feel like, to go his way to get 30. But the volume is definitely there. I mean, if they get out to a lead, he's still going to be on the field. I feel like, and yeah, we talked about it last week. Like, he hasn't been treated like Derrick Henry's actually kind of fallen off from, just a fantasy standpoint, but he wasn't been treated like the conversation of Saquon Barkley, CMC, and Derrick Henry. And he definitely should. I think if he didn't miss those games early on this season, we'd be talking about his season this year completely different.
Do you think you could play Stroud, Mixon, and Nico all in the same lineup?
I mean, listen, like, didn't that just happen with Detroit Lions not too long ago in week 11? Like, you just played everybody against this team because they are shit. Yeah, I think it's definitely viable. And I think, having 1 to 2 Jaguars to bring it back with makes a ton of sense too, because of with Trevor Lawrence potentially being back. But even if it were Mac Jones out there, like, the Texans could still, like, this is a get right spot for them. They definitely need to get something clicking on the offensive side of the ball with their offensive line struggling. CJ's been struggling. And again, he's had his best games against this team. So yeah, I expect them to put up points and would be happy to get all the points with the quarterback and the running back.
Yeah, I definitely think that's in play.
Yeah. Glad we can agree on something there. If we can't agree on Justin Herbert, we can at least agree on Joe Mixon. Shout out to everybody coming in the chat. Rup Marco saying, hey, how's it going, guys? We appreciate Rup Marco rocking with us back from the Thanksgiving slate as well too. Didn't expect Tua to put up those 29 points. Yeah, we really didn't necessarily expect that as well too. I was very low on Miami, but concentrated offense when they're trailing is gonna do some things. And Tua showed up in the cold, in the cold, despite everybody chopping at the bit saying that he might not. Anything else at running back? We could talk wide receiver and get to Ugo, or we got anything else to cover?
I think that's I don't think there's anything else. I think we pretty much hit on. I think we're all in lockstep on a lot of the players. didn't really want to talk over. Like Brian Robinson's semi-interesting. Like, I know you talked about the situation. We have seen him last year. Like last year, he was actually a really good pass catcher last year. In the opportunities that he got, like he was like top 10 in yards per out run and stuff like that. Just he really hasn't been asked to do that this year because of Austin Eckler. So that's definitely like he's an interesting play. Like he was chalk last week. I mean, I think he was like 25% owned or something like that, and definitely failed. But he's still only 6,100 against Tennessee. And if there's an offense that needs a get right game, this is also another team that needs a get right game because the Commanders' offense. I know he had that late explosion against the Commanders or against the Cowboys last week, but like that's definitely a team that could use that. But like Brian Robson's interesting, but I don't think you need to get there with all the other options there is. But
no.
Yeah.
No, but I don't want it to go overlooked. We really didn't have a conversation about it, Kev, but I know you kind of brought him up just very briefly. But Tony Pollard, like at 6,300, this guy's not going to be played. And I remember weeks early on in the season where it was jam Tony Pollard in every week. He's a high projected running back. He's the only guy. And now we're not going to have Tajay Spears. I believe he's already been ruled out. And he comes in at 6,300, priced ahead of Chase Brown, priced right under Chuba. Kind of in that no man's land. And Washington really sneakily has been giving up a ton of production to running backs this year. They're giving up the most rushing yards to running back. They're giving up 11 touchdowns, which is tied for fourth most when we're talking about, DK points. They're not going to get there from the season, but as of recently, they've been giving up a lot of points and production. And again, it's just like it's kind of forgotten about. Especially if the Washington side of the football is going to be popular. Don't forget about Tony Pollard there. It's really been Pollard and Ridley carrying that offense. I just wanted to take the time to touch on that because I think he is a really high leverage tournament play this week. So, and one I haven't been on. So I'm going to give him his flowers if he pops off this week. Let's talk about wide receiver, boys. Which again, this slate, the quarterback's been fun to talk about. Running back was fun to talk about. Wide receiver is definitely fun to talk about. I mean, if Herbert's going to be the most popular quarterback this week, you got to start with Ladd McConkey at 6,100. The production that he's been seeing, as a rookie is absolutely phenomenal. I don't think I think everybody who starts with Herbert is probably going to be clicking on this wide receiver and then possibly the tight end who's been the favored secondary target of Justin Herbert. But Quentin Johnson is interesting to me. I mean, he's been so, the targets are not going to be there. The target share is not going to be there, but this dude was just known for catching touchdowns. And then this Atlanta matchup, like in the dome, I could just see him going out there and just wrecking and not really going to be popular. I think he's an interesting one-off play. If you think that the touchdowns kind of go the way of Quentin Johnston and not, not to McConkey or Will Dissly. 6 touchdowns on the year. He's boomer bust, man. He reminds me a lot of Valdez-Scantling. Like, he's going to be running deep and you just hope that he catches the ball and doesn't drop it because he does have the case of the dropsies. Had 5 targets last week, didn't catch any of them, really tilting for my showdown builds. But I think, from the standpoint of people want to play this offense, but they might not be thinking about that guy. I think that's interesting. One to start with the Chargers because I know how popular Justin Herbert's going to be this week. But at the top, I mean, Jamar Chase, he's in a phenomenal matchup here against the Steelers. I think that people will be worried about Porter Jr. on the other side and who he's going to shadow. Is it going to be Chase? Is it going to be Higgins? And I've seen some things about possibly Porter shadowing Higgins. It's been a while since these two have been on the field against the Steelers. I believe Chase was out with a game with injury last year, if I'm not mistaken, and then they kind of switched earlier. But Chase has actually been incredible with Higgins being back in the lineup there. Definitely has helped him out, and we know what the upside is with him every week. I can't be playing Joe Burrow without Jamar Chase. AJ Brown is, in a phenomenal spot, absolutely on paper. And then if you factor in that Devonta Smith might miss this game, it's just how do you not want to have interest in AJ Brown? I just am probably going to be playing him with Hurts most likely, and just hoping that the production really does, come from there, helps out Hurts there. Hopefully Hurts gets a couple rushing. It's tough at that $8,300 price tag to play him alone, but it absolutely makes all the sense in the world. Justin Jefferson, the forgotten about man, he's 8,100 going against an Arizona defense that's been really, a lot better, but we know what Justin Jefferson can do. And then Nico Collins. I mean, look, Nico Collins, Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, like these are your first price wide receivers at cost that we're talking about here. Nico Collins is in a phenomenal matchup. I know you and Maddie Kev have been talking about Nico Collins at nauseum, and he's 7,900. He's $100 cheaper than Joe Mixon, but when you're talking about production, it's like this dude could really go out there, and things just haven't gone his way since he's been back from injury. A couple touchdowns missed his way that could really be changing the outlook that we have on Nico, but it's just Nico's world in Houston. And I mean, mixing it to a certain extent, but pass catching wise, Nico's world, we're living in it. Puka's been amazing this year. It's been tough too because he's been out with injury, but his target share has been through the roof with Matthew Stafford the past couple of weeks. And he's been putting, I mean, look at this, 23 points with no touchdowns, 28 points with that one touchdown, 18 points, missed the 100-yard bonus there with 98 yards. Like, Puka is one of the best, point per dollar options I feel like to get to at 7,600. I think he's too cheap, honestly, for what the production has been and how much Stafford's been leaning on him. So really got some really nice high price options at the top. Like I said, T. Higgins at $6,600, I think is really cheap for what his upside offers in that matchup. I think that, we talked about the Chargers guys, but Calvin Ridley is always going to be in play. They refuse to price him up, and I don't understand it. He's $5,700 here going against Washington. He's very intriguing to me. Love Brian Thomas Jr. this week. I expect him to be extremely popular. He's another guy. Price tag hasn't changed. It's $5,500 that, was priced with Mac Jones. If we're getting $5,500 priced with Trevor Lawrence, without, Gabe Davis and without Christian Kirk being out there, just a phenomenal spot. The Indy pass catchers as well too. I just want to touch on before I pass it to you, Maddie. Looks like we're not going to have Josh Downs, so it's going to be Michael Pittman, A.D. Mitchell, and others to kind of hold the ship. I will say that I believe Alec Pierce is also questionable. I don't think he's been officially ruled out yet, but that just would make that situation much more clear of playing Pittman or Mitchell, even with the passing volume or lack thereof of Anthony Richardson. You got to like the upside for one of these two guys. It's been nice to see him and Pittman get on the same page. But A.D. Mitchell can take one to the house like if Pierce was in there. So Maddie, come on in here, talk to the people about what you're doing at wide receiver, as there are a lot of fun spots to be talked about this week.
Yeah, the more you started to go through the wide receiver position, it makes me realize how many different passing attacks you can really get exposure to this week. And I just don't think jamming in the chalk Chargers makes a ton of sense if there's all these viable options across the board. I mean, I'm not gonna sit here and hash out and touch on every single guy that you just mentioned again, but I mean, I'll reiterate along the lines of what you said. T. Higgins leads Cincinnati in targets in games that him and Chase are playing together this year. He's been the de facto wide receiver one for them when they both play. And part of that's because, teams focus on taking Chase away. But the other part of that is T. Higgins is just a good wide receiver. So, 6,600 for T. Higgins. We already talked about, Burrow's in play. Chase Brown's in play. So Higgins is also in play there. Puka's another one that just is another wide receiver one on the team. I mean, he is absolutely smashed both last year and this year. Pretty much every game that he plays, he is the focal point of the passing attack. You get exposure to that high total 50 total game in the Dome in New Orleans, late hammer, 7,600. He should be over 8K, honestly. Like, I think 7,600 is too cheap for Puka. Nico Collins is the other guy up top that I like a lot. You guys touched on the Houston pass attack there against Jacksonville, 7,900. It's costly, but he's one of the few receivers that can go for 35 plus on any slate, but especially this one. Then you've got the Falcons guys. I like the Falcons guys a lot, both Drake London and Darnell Mooney. You know, the Chargers have actually given up a ton of production to opposing receivers, and they've played against some dog shit offenses throughout the year. Like really only the last 2 games have the Chargers played competent offenses on the other side of the ball. And that was when they played the Bengals and the Ravens the last 2 games, and they gave up a ton of points. Both Higgins and Chase nuked the Chargers. We saw Bateman and Zay Flowers both have good games last week. Zay didn't find the end zone, but still had an okay day. So I really like the Falcons receivers. And we didn't really talk about Kirk Cousins, but I mean that's an interesting way to get to pivot off of the other side of that game being the Chargers passing attack. So both London and Mooney are in play for me. We talked about how expensive Baltimore and the Philly game is. While I do like AJ Brown, I definitely prefer the other guys up top, but Puka and Nico to AJ this week. But I definitely think AJ Brown is still in play. But I will say on the other side of that game, $6,200 Zay Flowers. I'll continue to play him every week. That's a semi cheap piece for to get exposure to that game. So I think Zay Flowers is really interesting. He's a good bet to get you in the 20s, and he has flashed his 30+ upside this year, something he wasn't able to do last year. So I think Zay is interesting. You guys touched on Mike Evans when talking about Baker in that Carolina Tampa Bay game. I think Evans is fine. He's always capable of getting you 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then Tank Dell is another one. If you're playing Stroud, I think you have to play Dell and Nico together with Stroud, with how concentrated that offense is. So that's pretty much going to be it for me. George Pickens is another one, I guess, that I'll briefly touch on, but that Cincinnati defense hasn't been great, and Pickens and Russell Wilson have really shown a chemistry together. We know he will target him heavily if he needs to, and it's a good game for it to happen. So if I was running a couple Bengals on a team, I would definitely look to run Pickens on the other side.
Yeah, definitely like Pickens, and you and Kev both alluded to that. But yeah, he's only 6,200, and you can figure out a way to get him in definitely easily. Kev, what say you at the wide receiver position, and where you looking to build around?
Yeah, I mean, just building off what you said about Pickens. I mean, it's also he is getting all the high leverage stuff and high value targets that we're looking for, right? But not to mention he's just seeing a 30% target share this year, which is awesome. But he's also has 43.8% market share of the air yards, which is top 5 among all wide receivers. He has the 4th most deep targets and the 5th most red zone targets among all wide receivers this year. He's just really been unlucky in some opportunities where he should have scored, multiple touchdowns, whether called back by penalty, or 1 or 2 where Russ kind of missed them. But he's been like legitimately a stud this year. It's just his numbers don't quite add up to some of that because of the fact that, it's just a little bit of bad luck. But he's also 8th in yards per route run, 5th in yards per team pass attempt. Like George Pickens has been that dude. And he's 6,800. Like it's not that hard to get to him. Like I said, we know he's going to see he's going to be targeted at a very high rate. And then also the fact that Cincinnati allows the 4th most fantasy points to outside wide receivers and the 11th most DK points to wide receivers overall. So it's just a phenomenal net spot for George Pickens to go off. And if he can just convert some of these touchdowns, he's a player that can put up 30 DK points on a slate, and he's $6,800. So I 100% am on board with that. You guys, T. Higgins is also he's too cheap, $6,600. He leads the team in market share, or he leads the team in first read target share on this team. He's scored, he's been pretty consistent too, 15 or more DK points in 4 straight games as well. So there's lots of like there with T. Higgins. And then the Brian Thomas call, like I've said, just a really good spot. Houston really struggles against wide receivers this year. 7th most DK points to wide receivers. They allowed the 13th most receptions, the 8th most receiving yards, and the most receiving touchdowns this year to wide receivers. And prior to Brian Thomas suffering that chest injury and then Trevor Lawrence going out, I mean, Brian Thomas was among some of the best wide receivers in the league before that happened. And that bye week should definitely do Brian Thomas some good. obviously getting Trevor Lawrence back is going to be huge for that passing offense. So I definitely agree on both those fronts. Puka Nacua, really love that call. So the Saints run man coverage at the 8th highest rate in the league, and Puka Nacua has absolutely torched man coverage this year. He's running he has a 3.84 yards per route run versus man, which is the 3rd highest rate in the league. And then he sees an absolute elite 44% target share against man coverage this year. So Puka Nacua, I think, could absolutely go nuclear as well on this slate at $7,600. So definitely agree there on that call with him. And then I think, I do agree. I think, one interesting spot for leverage, if I don't really quite understand why. I can understand Herbert being really, really popular on this slate because he's $5,600. He's starting to run the ball a lot more. But I don't understand about the rest of their pieces because I think it's kind of volatile to where these pieces could go. And then on the other side of the ball, I think that definitely Drake London can get there. I think Darnell Mooney has been awesome this year. So if the Falcons aren't going to be popular, I think that if you just want to get involved in that game environment, just go to the other side and play the Falcons there because it's still pretty consolidated from where your targets are going to go, right? It's pretty much Drake London and Darnell Mooney. I know Kyle Pitts gets involved, but he doesn't see as much as these other guys do. And to be fair, Darnell Mooney should be more expensive than $5,600. For what he's done this year, he's easily going to surpass 1,000 receiving yards this year. He might get 8 or 9 touchdowns this year. I mean, he's been really, really good, and he's been pretty damn consistent. He hasn't given you much in terms of a huge ceiling. He has the one game where he scored 34, but I mean, at $5,600, if he can give you 18 to 20 DK points, we'll take that all day at that price. So I like that call as well. And so then Adonai Mitchell could be one that ends up being really interesting because especially if Alec Pierce were to miss, but even still with Josh Downs out, it kind of changes things a little bit and changes some of the math because Adonai Mitchell, which we saw in that game before, I think it was Joe Flacco's last game, I believe, that Adonai Mitchell, when Michael Pittman missed, and he kind of had a pretty big game, but he has been obviously one of their best deep threat receivers this year. And a lot of it's been that Anthony Richardson has just missed him quite a few times, but that's still what Anthony Richardson does the best is throw the deep ball. So he could be kind of a really contrarian, interesting value play at $3,900 if you're looking for some significant value. That could definitely open up in his favor at $3,900. And then any love for Parker Washington with all these players out for Jacksonville? We kind of talked about it, but he's likely going to run the slot at quite a bit. He's $3,900. Like we said, if you like that game environment, and I don't necessarily hate it for someone like Parker Washington, who's $3,900.
Yeah, he's definitely an interesting leverage play off of AD Mitchell, who's going to be popular, and there should just be more volume theoretically coming Parker Washington's way because we expect Jacksonville to be down in this game potentially based on what Vegas is saying. So if Lawrence is back, I think that's definitely a good spot to target there. Kev, Mitchell is going to have to do it on 5 targets probably.
Kev, you're the one that brought up a couple of weeks ago, though, when, I brought up Parker Washington to fill in for Kirk. And, you brought up a good point that Evan Ingram tends to just play the slot role for them. If they've got Brian Thomas back, Ingram playing the slot. I mean, is there even really a role for him? Because he's been in this spot already this year. And I mean, he hasn't scored 10 plus DK points. I mean, he had 6 targets in week 9. So I mean, I guess that's fine, but he's 3,900. He's not free.
It's hard to judge because I mean we've had all these weeks with Trevor Lawrence out, so it's harder to judge this offense off of Mac Jones being the quarterback. But I just think overall there's not a whole lot else in his way. But I would agree. He's still not. Let's see. He's playing a little bit more from the slot so far. I mean, he's 31% of the routes from the slot, not extremely high here, and he's not playing the last 3 games he's played 58% of the snaps, 52% of the snaps, 86% of the snaps in week 9, and when he played 86% of the snaps, that's when he saw 6 targets in that game. But the last 2 weeks it was 3 and 0 targets in those games. But so yeah, I think there's a lot of volatility there, But that was, also, Gabe Davis, had been playing, so he's also out. Like, there's just not a whole lot else to hold the ball to. But I agree that it would definitely be Brian Thomas and Evan Ingram. But I think if you're just wanting, if you're really searching for, if you love a lineup and you're looking for a value play, I think maybe he is a spot you could look at.
Definitely. Yeah. And I mean, we got some other, cheap options down here. I mean, the Carolina guys, David Moore, this guy's just been able to do it. He's
I like the 80
3,500.
Mitchell call.
Yeah.
Right.
80 Mitchell, 3,900. You got cheap guys for New England consistently. I mean, Kendrick Bourne and Kashawn Booty, just because of they're not getting the volume, as so to speak, because the game scripts haven't allowed for them. But if the Colts and New England game becomes anything, these guys are the two main guys out, as far as wide receivers go, outside of Hunter Henry, to be able to catch the ball from Drake May. So they become interesting. I mean, even like a guy, Calvin Austin, we know that he is not on the field all the time, but he's out there. Russ is looking for him deep. If the Cincinnati Bengals are putting up a ton of points, like they could be leaning on Calvin Austin to be out there.
I love that call. That's a really, really sharp call. I think $3,300 Calvin Austin. I mean, he's been seeing like 5 or 6 targets almost pretty consistently in a lot of these games. So that's a really good call.
And he's just forgotten, and with Mike Williams coming back into the mix as well too, but he hasn't really, we'll see if they start working him in a little bit more. But I think that Calvin Austin has definitely earned his way on the field with how he's been playing with Russ. And there's some really fun ways to go. And you mentioned it, Maddie, briefly, but the New Orleans wide receiver position, I mean, you can just MVS is the number one. So right there, it's already a fragile position, but you can take some chances, I guess, on these guys against the Rams if that game can become something. Take your chances on the Cedric Wilson, I guess, or anything like that, because these, a game environment could speak to that. So in order to get, the game right and really feel good about your environment that you're targeting, we can look down in the 4K and below range and find some pieces that can definitely tell the story. Just real quickly, because these two situations have been popular in past slates, but I don't see any ownership coming on these two guys or these two situations at all. But the Seattle wide receivers and the Jets wide receivers, you guys see yourselves getting any exposure to any one of those fronts with both Metcalf and Jackson are always priced by each other, and then the same with Garrett and Devontae are priced by each other. Not really that great of a matchup for the Jets. Or Seattle for that matter, but the defense has been kind of wearing for the Jets, so maybe Seattle's in play. Don't know.
That game just feels gross for me. I don't know. There's just something about it. And I know the Jets defense has been bad ever since they fired Saleh, but I don't know. That game just doesn't really do anything for me. And Breece Hall is obviously questionable, which we didn't talk about, but
he's playing. He's playing.
He's going to play, but that offense, it's just, I don't know. It's just they can do some weird stuff. I think, especially, they've talked about shutting down Rodgers and
it's been so it does feel like a spot that all of a sudden they come out and because when nobody was on, nobody's going to be on them. But no, I would have very little. If I was going to play anybody from that game outside of the run, at a wide receiver, it'd probably be JSN. But that would be about it. That's about the only player that I could even DK Metcalf. I guess you could make an argument too. I think they're pretty similar in terms of just overall kind of the way they're utilized. But even just looking at how they're utilized, whether it's first man versus zone, because the Jets do run the 7th highest rate in terms of man coverage, but they're pretty similar. DK Metcalf and actually JSN are in terms of everything. But I will say JSN actually sees almost a 30% target share versus man compared to DK Metcalf, who's 23%. So, and JSN has been much better against man than DK Metcalf has been this year.
Yeah, no, and the Jets have been pretty good at containing wide receivers this year. It's like the one thing that their that their defense can hang their hat on is the production from the wide receiver position has not been that stellar from opposing teams. So
Do you guys
yeah,
would you guys have any interest in because I know you guys have talked about the Indianapolis Colts and that game. Would you have any interest in Michael Pittman with Josh Downs out?
yeah,
'Cause if you look at the splits with Josh Downs out versus in, like Michael Pittman's production goes way up whenever Josh Downs is out. So like he's going to be playing from the slot. I mean, he had a solid game last week. Didn't find the end zone, but Michael Pittman did. But he's only $5,300. Like, um, I don't know. I saw 7 targets last week. You've seen almost 15 targets the last 2 games. Like, do you have any interest there?
Absolutely.
yeah,
I think
I agree.
Richardson with Pittman or Richardson with AD Mitchell is absolutely in play.
Yeah, and I would only want to play Richardson with one of
With
those
one,
guys.
yeah, because you want
Um,
rushing
Yeah,
production.
you want that. I mean, and you're just gonna get it, Maddie. I feel like. I mean, the volume just has not been there. Like if he goes out and throws 40 times, we're getting an outlier game from him, and so be it. That is what it is. But for the most part, like he's going to be throwing 25 times. You're hoping that he's able to complete 60% of those. But the way that Pittman's been used over the past couple of weeks, Kev, even when Downs was out there, they were trying to get him a little bit more involved. But now without Downs, he's a we know Michael Pittman's game. He's perfect from PPR format, and I know that Mitchell will be more popular than him because he's cheaper. So I would love to get Pittman on those lineups.
If you play Richardson and one of Pittman or AD, are you jamming in a Patriot on the run back, or are you just letting it ride naked?
No,
Let's ride. I
I'm,
don't think
I'm
there's anybody reliable from the New England side that you can even trust. Like,
I agree.
I will say we didn't talk about him, but I will say Ramondre is interesting in those stacks. If the game is close, Ramondre has actually had some decent games in Patriot scoring games. So he's only 5,900. It's just like I don't like Ramondre outside of that game stack. But if I was playing it, I would much rather go that route than Hunter Henry or the wide receivers, just because of the leverage that it offers. And at 5,900, like if he's not going to get you like 30, but if he can get me, 20 points, 20 to 24 points, that we've seen him do before, I think it's an interesting play that people won't get to.
Yeah, I think he's fine. I don't think he's a smash or anything, but I think he's
No,
fine.
no. And that would just be run back like that. I know, we talk about run back, and most of the time it's who's that pass catcher gonna be to run it back instead of the running back. But yeah, that would be my play for that build. But yeah, fun slate to talk about with the skill position wide receiver. Shout out to everybody who's been rocking along with us in the chat for the DGen Nation podcast live show as we break down the week 13 main slate powered by the Fantasy Authority. We love talking shop with you guys, and we appreciate having you along for the ride. Boys, we got to talk about tight end and defense before we're able to wrap up the pod and build that lineup for the people. And, again, tight end, I think, it's always going to be straightforward because it's just a gross position and pretty much has been all year outside of a couple of name suspects. But, when we have Trey McBride on the slate, he's 5,800, always going to be interest there with the role that he has there. Taysom Hill, we get him back on the main slate. He's 5K now. But we know what his role is, and honestly, with the wide receiver room looking how it is, Maddie, we kind of have talked about this. Like, if you're not playing Kamara, do you consider playing Taysom Hill? Because both of these guys are so involved in what they want to do from an offensive standpoint. One of these guys is likely to put up a good score. We've seen that kind of come to fruition this season. It's just been crazy to see. If Evan Ingram is interesting, this is a guy I felt like I've been chasing him pretty much all year. Had one good game on the season there against Chicago at 4,700 earlier on. And really, that's his only 20-point DK performance. But yeah, as Kevin Meddy both alluded to, like with the way that the wide receiver position is shaping up and Trevor Lawrence being back, this could be a game to lean on Evan Ingram a lot, especially against this Houston defense there. So we could see a lot of production for Evan Ingram. I expect him to be, pretty popular because I think that some projection models will have him coming in as such. And with Lawrence being back, I think that'll just kind of solidify that. Kyle Pitts, it feels like it's been a while since we've been able to talk about him. He's had 3 duds in a row, but he has shown a ceiling this year at least. And in a game environment that's expected to be attacked, I think I might have some interest in him. He's 4,600. I just don't know if I'll get there. I think everything kind of starts and ends, at least for me, with Dallas Goedert. If we're not going to have Devonta Smith out there, 4,300, he's an easy way to get a piece of that late game without having to take the high price pieces and really feeling good about it. We've seen Dallas Goedert really step up when a receiver has missed for Jalen Hurts, and he, really peppers them with targets. It's honestly like without Devonta Smith out there, we kind of saw it on the showdown, like AJ Brown and Dallas Goedert are going to be the looks for everything. Like they have, they're not going to be playing some of these other guys just that much. It just is crazy. So love the production that he could be getting. Will Disley comes in at 4K. I expect him to be extremely popular on Herbert builds, as he, outside of Ladd McConkey, this has been a guy that Herbert's leaned on the past couple of weeks and just isn't priced as such. Outside of that, I think you could talk me into some of these cheap guys, but it's most likely going to be, on builds that I have. I will say I am interested in a Dalton Schultz with CJ Stroud builds, as he's kind of been, he hasn't gotten there in the box score, but he's definitely been on the field, and I could see him being leaned on a little bit more. But yeah, for me, it's, I think I have interest in Taysom. I have interest in Evan Ingram, interest in Goddard at most, and then, probably mix and matching with my quarterback. Bringing in Glenn Smith, talking about the ownership on Indy. Maddie, you're our ownership guy. Maybe you can answer that question for him, but I'll let you, kind of ride with that question, and then also let the people know what you're doing at tight end as well.
Yeah, I'm seeing like 14-ish% for Anthony Richardson, and then 10% for AD Mitchell and Pittman. So definitely not chalk by any means for any of those guys.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, it's levels that I'm comfortable with playing them. And then at the tight end position, speaking of the Indy game, I think Hunter Henry is interesting. I went to him last week against Miami. It didn't work out. Hooper ended up catching the touchdown, but I mean, you look at Henry's game logs. He hasn't caught a touchdown in a while, and he's still got game logs of 17, 12, and 12 and 9. So I mean, you give him a touchdown in those games, and he's at, he got a 23 in there, mixed with some other 18-point games if you were to give him a touchdown. So I definitely think that Henry's in play, and you want to, I would probably, the more I think about it, I would probably want a New England guy on the run back, just because I could see the Colts, just turning around and handing the ball off to Jonathan Taylor if they play with any kind of lead and New England doesn't push them at all. Mm-hmm. So, if I'm playing Richardson, I kind of want him to be, kind of in a back and forth with New England a little bit, which I do think Drake May can be good enough at home to cause that environment to happen. But I do like Hunter Henry there at tight end. Totally agree on the Taysom Hill call. It's typically him or Kamara scoring all the touchdowns. So if you're not playing Kamara, you have to have interest in Taysom. We know he's involved in passing the ball, throwing the ball, catching the ball, running the ball, all of the above. Heck, I wouldn't be surprised if he'd kick the ball at some point too. So yeah, Taysom's interesting at 5K. He should honestly be priced up higher than that. I do like the Ingram call. He shouldn't be 4,800 against Houston, and he is. So Ingram's absolutely in play. He would be my run back if I was playing Stroud and Nico and Tank or Mixon. I would run it back with Ingram on the other side. It's hard to ignore Cade Otton. The Panthers are the worst defense against tight ends. Cade Otton very easily could go 6 for 80 and 2 touchdowns in this game and get you 26 DK points. TJ Hawkinson's another one that he finally, after being back for 4 weeks now, finally got a monster target share last week. He had 9 targets, 7 catches, 114 yards, didn't score, and still scored 21 DK points. So finally, he's back. He's healthy, and he is insanely cheap at $4,400 against Arizona. So Hawkinson is at the top of my list for tight ends this week. And then Disley. Yeah. Disley's another one. If you're playing Herbert, I think you just play Disley with him.
Yeah. I don't see how you run Herbert stacks without Disley with the usage he's been having on that team. Usage in NBA term, but yeah, target share he's been having on that team, been incredible. So like that call out. Kev, come in and talk to the people and let them know what you're doing at tight end for week 13.
Well, I know he's the most expensive tight end on the slate, but Trey McBride has just seen an absurd amount of opportunity recently. And it's just, or not recently, but really all year. It's the only frustrating thing with him is that he just hasn't continually found the end zone as a receiver. He has found it, on the ground and through a fumble. But in terms of just scoring, he hasn't been able to do that. But he's done everything else, and he just sees. Coming off a 15-target game last week against Seattle. 29% target share in this offense since week 8. I mean, it's leads all tight ends in receiving yards, and it's really not that particularly close. So he is a great play at cost, but if you're wanting to jam all these other dudes in, like, it's going to be hard to get to Trey McBride as kind of a one-off, because I don't really want to play Kyler Murray, but I don't hate Cade Otton. Like, I see the path, and looking at last week, like I said, like, there's definitely a scenario where a lot of it was game script driven, that they were just up by so much. That's why he only saw 3 targets, which was a pretty significant change from what he was seeing. But Mike Evans being there is going to affect that. But I think the interesting one may be the Baltimore tight end. If you can get a lean on which one you want to play, because Mark Andrews at 3,900 is probably too cheap. He has started to come to life in recent weeks, where it hasn't been as bad as what it was. I mean, to start the year, the dude was just absolutely dreadful, but he has started to play a lot better in recent games. And I mean, it could be a cheap spot also to get to this, to get into this game, where you could play Mark Andrews at 3,900. I mean, Isaiah Likely, I guess, is also an option too, especially if the game script goes off the rails, where it is a high scoring game where one of these two guys, it's probably going to get there, because I mean, the rest of the pass catchers from the Baltimore side, I mean, yeah, you feel probably good about Zay Flowers, but Rashad Bateman's hit or miss as another option. But Deontay Johnson, I don't know if I've seen a trade where a guy has been not even involved and then just looks terrible. Just looks disinterested to even be there at this point. So I do think Mark Andrews at 3,900 could be interesting as well, as another kind of a cheaper option.
We have seen games where Lamar throws 5 touchdowns, and the more I think about it, Lamar, Zay, and Andrews is not that expensive of a stack to get to. Honestly, you probably have the salary to run it back with AJ Brown if you want, or Saquon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you potentially do. I'm not in the weeds on like the splits or who's utilized when, but because Philly's actually been really good at containing tight end production this year. I think they've only allowed 1 touchdown on the year, and they got to be bottom, top 5, I guess, of points against in every metric, pretty much against tight ends. But it is interesting to think about a likely spot here because of, the wide receiver outside of Zay Flowers and Bateman has been dust. Like you said, Deontay's not involved, and Aguilar really, he only is involved in a red zone role, it always feels like. So if they can get Likely involved here, he would be the guy that I would be interested to stack Lamar with. Because he could be out there running more routes than we've been accustomed to. He really kind of hasn't done anything of merit since everybody, in redraft kind of, blew all their fab to be able to get him after that week 1 performance. But, if it's going to be tough sledding for Mark Andrews, then I think Likely could be mixed in and utilized, in more passing routes for sure.
And I guess you could make the argument that a lot of stuff that you look at with Philly, like the way their defense is played, they really haven't played a lot of like great offenses this year. I mean, so like some of it could be a little bit misleading on some of this. Like Baltimore is definitely probably arguably the best offense they faced. I know they faced like Cincinnati, but that was in week 8. But that was also, I think T. Higgins was out in that game, if I remember correctly. Goddard, I think, got there that game. I think he had like 70 yards, or not Goddard, but Gesicki got there against them. But I mean, they played, Washington, Dallas, Jacksonville, Cincinnati, the Giants, Cleveland. Like, I mean, it's not been a murder's row of great offenses. So, and I think you're right. Like, I guess looking at it more, like, I mean, Baltimore doesn't really have expensive, options to stack with. So, if this game were to go nuclear, maybe just from a pricing standpoint, that Baltimore makes a little more sense. But I do think it's tricky between the tight ends because it's harder to get a really good lean on which way this game's going, or which one to go with.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. It definitely is. It's probably probably a multi-enter approach that you would want to make sure you cover your bases on. But yeah, either one of those guys does feel interesting because we know Lamar can just get the ball to these guys, and like you said, they haven't played an offense like this one yet. It wouldn't surprise me if Baltimore goes out there.
He has been more involved in the games that they've been trailing, and they've had to throw the ball a lot more. He has been more involved in those games. I mean, 2 weeks ago against Pittsburgh, they trailed in that game the entire game. He saw 5 targets in that game, 4 for 75. And then Cleveland game, they trailed for a lot of that. He did see 4 targets in that one. But it's not like a lot of high usage outside of the one game in Kansas City where he's had 12 targets. But other than that, he's still seen 4 or 5 targets in a lot of the games that they've trailed.
Yeah.
True enough.
I mean, that's just by far the best game of the week. Like, Baltimore's defense is awful, and Slay's questionable for Philly. Like, and Baltimore's offense is just unreal. Like, I just think both defenses are not great. Philly's defense has definitely been better, but again, how much of that is competition? I mean, the rookie corners have been very good, but again, Slay's banged up. I don't know. If there's a game that ends, 38-35 or something ridiculous, it's just that's the one. You've got AJ Brown, Saquon Barkley, Lamar, Henry, Zay Flowers, Bateman, all these guys on the field, playing offense. Like, it's just big plays galore all over. So I feel like that one could end up back and forth, and I don't know. I think it's going to go underlooked because of how expensive the QBs and Saquon are.
Yeah, and also being in that late window too, Maddie. It's like you got to wait for all your PMR, right? To you're going to look at those noon games, and people will be crossing their fingers. Okay, is there going to be a had to have it score that I'm going to be missing out on here? Just really going to be potentially kicking themselves. But yeah, I mean, if no game, if you don't get a 60-point total, showing, then you could be chilling with that late window and looking at all those guys who are left, and nobody's put up 30 points so far yet.
Hurts and Lamar both 3%. Saquon's 4%.
Wow.
Zay Flowers is 9%. AJ Brown's 6%. Dude, that game, nobody's playing that game.
Yeah.
It's the best game of the week.
And if they are, they're just taking maybe one piece from it,
right?
And hoping they get it right. Interesting. Yeah, it's going to be a fun one, and fun to
stack up that game.
Fun to talk about. The tight ends as well from that game, because on both sides there, those guys can play.
Be there. Mark Andrews 2%.
No, they're not going to be on. I know it. Let's talk about defense and wrap it up for the people, boys. Shout out to everybody again who's rocking along with us here on the DJ Nation podcast, powered by the Fantasy Authority. We're gonna get to defense. We're gonna build this lineup, and we're gonna get you guys on your merry way to get those Week 13 builds in. Defense is a fun one, guys. I think that we'll see the Texans going against Jacksonville being very popular, but again, we don't know who the quarterback is starting. But 3,500 for them. I can see the Commanders getting some love too because Will Levis is on the other side at 3,400. But we do have some cheap options that really jump off the page to me. I mean, Kev's been beating the drum for Arizona the past couple of weeks. They're 2,400 going against Sam Darnold in Minnesota. But Sam Darnold has made some mistakes, and they're only 2,400. That could be an interesting one. I think 2,500 Patriots have to have some interest just because there's Anthony Richardson on the other side, and we know he's been prone to make mistakes too. This is a New England home game, so it could be really tough for Richardson and those boys to maybe travel to the East Coast outdoors and play. I think the Colts defense as well will get some merit and garner some interest at 2,800. They've been really having some good game logs this season, so it's fun. And I know the chat was talking about the Seahawks going against the Jets, who are pretty much going to shell themselves on offense. They're 3,200. Vikings are 3,300 as well. I mean, there's some interesting defenses across the board. So I think for me, I do like the Colts at 2,800. Probably have interest in the Patriots, potentially the Cardinals if I'm paying down. If I could get to Vikings just because of what they've been doing, getting after the quarterback, and I don't have interest in Arizona at all. So I just naturally I'll probably look to get to Vikings. But how you feeling that defense, Matty? What are you looking at to do this week?
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't really have anything else. If you're not playing Houston, the Jags are interesting at mid price 2,300.
Love it, Kev. What say you?
The Cardinals are definitely in play. Like I've said, their defense has been pretty underrated this year. I mean, there's been definite times that Sam Darnold has looked like Sam Darnold, and the Cardinals defense continually has played pretty well. I mean, 3 straight games of double-digit DK points for them, and they've been under 3K every single time. Just continually pretty good spot to get to with them. So I do like that as a play. It's hard not to like the Vikings either on the other side of the game, because the Vikings, if you want to talk about consistency, they have scored double-digit DK points in almost every game this year, but I think 3. And I know at least 8 of the weeks they have scored double-digit DK points. The defense just gets so much pressure on the quarterback. They do such a good job of disguising their blitzes and everything else they do there with Brian Flores. So $3,300 Vikings is probably still a little bit too cheap for them as an option. So I think those two are the ones in that game that kind of stand out the most to me as a play.
Love it. Love it. All right, boys. Yeah, that's the Week 13 main slate. A fun one as we get to that 90-minute mark, just breaking down the slate. But there's a lot of options to be had on this slate, potentially a lot of environments that stand out on the page. So it's a fun one to be building around, and I know the people will have fun being able to listen back and maybe take some of our advice as they get their builds together. But we're going to do a build right now for the people with some of our thoughts on how the slate is shaping up. And I'm going to start it off. I think it's been a while since I have done so. And I'm going to put in Chuba Hubbard there at running back at 6,700 and start it off there.
All right. Matt, are you up next?
Sure. Let's go. You want to just double RB that game and go Bucky Irving?
Why not? Let's do it. We're throwing Bucky Irving as well. Gives us 53 and some change left for a player, 37.5 remaining salary for our QB stack.
I'm going to go CJ Stroud.
I'm going to go Brian Thomas for the run back.
Well, we need to try to fit Nico for playing Stroud.
So we throw in Nico.
Yeah, I already had him in.
44.25, wide receiver, tight end, flex defense.
So we need to save a little bit of money. I'm just going to go straight down to the Cardinals and put them in at 2,400.
Where's his price? I like Ingram, but let's try Schultz at 3,300 and save a little bit more salary.
All right, $6K for a wide receiver and a flex.
Yeah, $6K for wide receiver and flex.
Zay Flowers. I think there's a pretty obvious option after that.
$5,800 on flex.
My pick there would be Darnell Mooney at 56, but.
And now we wait for Kev to change the lineup build to fit what he wants.
No, I was just trying to see if you could fit both AJ Brown and Bateman, but you can't. Not even close. So, I feel better about Devonta Smith. It makes sense as a mini with him, but
he hasn't been
even
ruled
Devonta
out.
Smith himself wasn't confident that he was going to play. So. He said after practice today that he wasn't sure if he was going to play. So,
all right, what do you think about this? If we go, if we take out Schultz and go God or Ingram, that's the full salary. Zay Goddard mini.
I'm good with it.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
I don't know that I don't know that I'll personally run double tight end, but I'm okay with it.
So the team we have now that uses all the salary, which is rarely done by the DJ Nation podcast, but we find ourselves doing it this week. We got CJ Stroud, Chuba Hubbard, Bucky Irving, Brian Thomas Jr., Nico Collins, Zay Flowers, Dallas Goedert, Evan Ingram. Actually flipped those two to put Goddard in the flex since he's in the late game, and Cardinals D. That's going to wrap up the lineup, and that's going to do it for the Week 13 main slate. Boys, you got any final words for the peeps before they get to building their lineups for Sunday?
None other than I think it looks like a really good slate. I really, which is rare because there hasn't been a lot of weeks this year that I feel like we could say that there's a lot of different options here. Normally, it feels like there's like a game or two that you can get to, and then you try to figure out the rest. Like this feels like there's like a lot of different directions that you can go.
I agree.
Definitely. No, definitely. It's a fun one. It's a fun one. Maddie, we can't wait to see Justin Herbert put up 30 points for people's builds as the chalk QB. And maybe we'll have two people who eat crow on the DJ Nation podcast this year. But
not happening.
Fun one rocking with the boys as always. Fun rocking with you guys who are watching. Shout out to everybody watching live who comes in. We appreciate that. If you're listening back, all good, no worries. Just make sure you give us make sure you download the pod. Make sure you give us a like on YouTube, wherever you're listening to it. Just show us some love. We appreciate that. You can always watch on YouTube. Find the Discord link in the description and make sure you get over there to talk all things fantasy with the Fantasy Authority peeps. We'd love to have you. Signing off for Matty D, Matty DFS, Matty 2v2 at Matty DFS is where you can find him on Twitter and X. Signing off for the Godfather, Mr. Kevin Steele himself at FantasyRat13 is where you can find him on Twitter or X. I'm Ryan Williams. You can find me on Twitter or X at RyanAlexander_W. We will catch you guys next time for the Week 14 main slate breakdown. But until then, for Week 13, get this money. We'll see you next time. Peace.